After studying this module, you will be able to understand the concept of non-renewable resources, identify problems associated with their unchecked extraction, construct the model for efficient and optimal use of non-renewable resources, understand the static and dynamic efficiency conditions of the resource optimization problem, and understand the Hoteling's rule in the context of optimal use of non-renewable resources. Non-renewable resources are those mineral deposits whose crude forms are produced over very long periods of time by biological, chemical, and physical processes. Their rate of formation is sufficiently slow in time scales, and hence, in the physical sense, the non-renewable sources are said to be existing in fixed quantities. The depletion of exhaustible resources is a cause of serious concern and hence requires immediate attention in terms of regulation of their exploitation. Conservation and management of exhaustible resources has an explicit temporal dimension. The time horizon is first specified, when to start and when to stop, and then introduced as a decision variable. Let us study about the model for efficient and optimal use of non-renewable resources. We first establish the conditions that must be satisfied for optimal allocation of non-renewable resources so that the social welfare function can be maximized. Assume that the economy's social utility function at each point in time ut is equal to u bracket ct for all t where utility in each time period is the concave function of consumption, with uc greater than 0 and ucc is less than 0. Then the economy's intertemporal social welfare function in continuous time notation and infinite time horizons will be represented as W is equal to integral of U bracket CTE raised to power minus rho t, where t goes from 0 to infinity. Here, C is equal to consumption, U is equal to aggregate utility flow, and rho is equal to social utility discount rate. Variables are indexed by the time subscript t, where t is equal to 0, t, with t is equal to 0 being the initial period and t is equal to t, where t may be infinity, being the final period. In order to reach any optimal solution, two constraints must be satisfied. In order to reach any optimal solution, two constraints must be satisfied. First constraint on welfare optimization and second constraint on welfare optimization. As we are considering non-renewable resources, all of the resource stock is to be extracted and used by the end on the time horizon, as after this any remaining stock has no effect on social well-being. As renewable resources have fixed and finite initial stock, the total use of the resource over time is constrained to be equal to the fixed initial stock. Now we specify the environmental resource stock flow relationship for a non-renewable resource S naught. St is equal to S naught minus integral of R tau, where tau goes from 0 to t, where R is equal to environmental resource flow, amount extracted and used per period, St is equal to environmental resource stock, and S0 is equal to initial stock at t is equal to 0. The equation St is equal to S naught minus integral of R tau where tau goes from 0 to t, states that the stock remaining at time t bracket st is equal to the magnitude of initial stock bracket s0 less the amount of resource extracted over the time interval from 0 to t. The resource stock constraint can be alternatively written as S dot equal to minus RT, where S dot is equal to ds upon dt. The dot on the variable represents the time derivative, and the equation can be interpreted as the rate of depletion of the stock minus S dot above subscript t is equal to the rate of resource stock extraction RT. Here we consider the accounting identity relating consumption, output, and the change in the economy's stock of capital. The part of output that is not consumed results in changes to the capital stock of the economy. The relationship or national income accounting identity can be expressed in continuous time form as k dot above t is equal to qt minus ct, where k is equal to manufactured capital stock, q is equal to output produced in the economy, and c is equal to consumption. Let output Q be represented in the form of a production function involving two inputs, capital K and a non-renewable resource R. The economy's production function is equal to Qt is equal to Q bracket KT and RT, and let QR is equal to delta Q upon delta R is equal to marginal product of the resource. Qk is equal to delta Q upon delta K is equal to marginal product of capital. Substituting for Qt in equation, Qt is equal to Q bracket KT and RT from the production function in equation K dot above T is equal to Qt minus Ct. The accounting identity can be rewritten as K dot T equal to Qt is equal to Q bracket KT and RT minus Ct. We will now try to find the solution for the socially optimal intertemporal allocation of the non-renewable resource using the stock flow constraint of non-renewable resource and the national income identity. We need to solve the constrained optimization problem to maximize the social welfare function subject to the aforementioned two constraints. Select values for the choice variables Ct and Rt for t is equal to 0 to infinity to maximize W is equal to integral of UC bracket Te raised to power minus rho t, where t goes from 0 to infinity. The first two of the equations characterize static efficiency conditions, and the latter two are dynamic efficiency conditions that must be satisfied for the optimal solution. Subject to S dot above t is equal to minus RT, and as K dot above t equal to Qt is equal to Q bracket KT and RT minus CT. S0 is equal to S naught fixed. Solving the above problem using constraint optimization techniques, we arrive at four equations that characterize the optimal solution. These are UCT is equal to omega t, PT is equal to omega t QR t, P dot above t is equal to rho into PT, omega dot above t is equal to rho omega t minus qk t omega t, where qrt and qkt are the partial derivatives of output with respect to non-renewable resource and capital. These marginal products bear time subscript, indicating that their values will vary with over time in optimal solution. PT, omega t are the shadow prices of resource and the capital. Time subscripts indicate that the shadow prices will also vary over time. A shadow price is the price that emerges as a solution to an optimization problem. Alternatively, it is an implicit or planning price that a good productive input in this case will take if resources are allocated optimally over time. The shadow prices are expressed in terms of utils and not in terms of consumption or income. Static efficiency requires that marginal value of the services from the use of resource should be equal to the marginal value of the resource stock.
Well, the first equation states that the marginal utility of consumption is equal to the shadow price of the capital. As seen in the equation here, and as it has been noted earlier, that the shadow prices used for this analysis are in units of utility. So we can say on the basis of this condition that the marginal unit of output can either be consumed yielding U subscript CT units of utility or added to the capital stock yielding an amount of capital value omega t in utility units. This represents an efficient outcome because the marginal net benefit from using 1 unit of output for consumption is equal to its marginal net benefit when it is added to the capital stock. The second equation, as given here, states that the value of marginal product of the natural resource must be equal to the shadow price of the natural resource stock. The shadow price or the marginal value of the natural resource is P subscript T, and value of marginal product of the natural resource is given by the marginal product in the units of output, that is Q subscript RT multiplied by the value of 1 unit of output omega T. Well, one must note that in this analysis, value of marginal unit of output is identical to the value of marginal unit of capital stock, which is along an optimal path. This is so because it is assumed that if the output is not consumed, it adds to the capital. So omega t can be taken as both the value of marginal product of 1 unit of capital and the value of marginal product of 1 unit of the output. Dynamic efficiency conditions state that the rate of return earned by the same across each asset or resource, and this return also be the same at all points in time. In addition, this rate of return must be equal to the social rate of discount. The third equation states that the growth of rate of shadow price of the natural resource is equal to the social utility discount rate. This can be seen by dividing the third equation with PT. Finally, dividing both the sides of fourth equation by omega t, we obtain the equation which states that the return to physical capital, which is its appreciation plus its marginal productivity, must be equal to the social discount rate.
The hoteling rule is an intertemporal efficiency condition which must be satisfied by an efficient process of resource extraction. The third equation is also known as Hotelling's rule for the extraction of non-renewable resources. P dot above T is equal to rho into Pt, or dP by dt is equal to rho into Pt, where Pt is the shadow price of the resource at time t. By integrating the equation of Hotelling's rule, we get Pt is equal to P naught E rho t. In the equation, Pt is the undiscounted price of the natural resource. If Pt is discounted at the social utility discount rate of P, we arrive at P star T is equal to Pte minus rho into T equals P naught, where P star is the discounted resource price. The equation P star T is equal to Pte minus rho into T equals P naught states that the discounted price of natural resource is constant along an efficient resource extraction path. This is another way of saying that the discounted value of the resource should be the same at all time periods. Let us now explain the Hotelling's rule diagrammatically. X-axis represents time interval t, y-axis represents discounted price of natural resource Pt. The upward rising graph shows us that the discounted value of the resource should be the same at all time periods. The Hotelling rule may be a necessary condition, but not a sufficient one. Hotelling rule requires that the growth rate of price of a resource to be equal to the social discount rate, but this may not be enough to generate a unique price path. The figure exhibits two different initial prices, PA and PB, growing at the same social discount rate. Both these paths are efficient as they both satisfy Hotelling rule. There could be infinite price paths like the ones depicted, and all of them may be efficient, but only one of them can be the optimal path. The optimal solution to the optimization problem given by equations uc, t is equal to omega t, pt is equal to omega tqr, t, p dot above t is equal to rho into pt, omega dot above t is equal to rho omega t minus qk, t omega t requires that all the four conditions be satisfied simultaneously along with the initial values for stocks of capital and natural resource. The solution hence obtained yields unique time path for KT and RT and their associated prices that maximize the social welfare function. Let us now discuss the impact of royalty taxation or subsidies on Hotelling's rule. So far, we discussed a socially optimal pattern of natural resource use over time. We now consider the case of non-renewable resource extraction in perfectly competitive markets. An introduction of royalty tax or subsidy may have no effect on a resource owner's extraction decision for a reserve that is currently being extracted. The government may simply be able to collect some of the mineral rent or pay some subsidies without affecting in any way the resource extraction and production post the imposition of tax oblique subsidy. This result follows from the Hotelling rule of efficient resource depletion. Define alpha to be a royalty tax rate and denote the royalty or net price at time t by Pt. Then the post-tax royalty becomes 1 minus alpha Pt. But Hotelling's rule implies that the post-tax royalty must rise at the discount rate I if the resource is to be exploited efficiently. That is, 1 minus alpha into Pt equals 1 minus alpha into P not into E raised to the power 1 into T, or Pt equals P not E raised to the power 1 into T. It must be noted that discount rate I derived from the private market interest rate may be treated as equal to rho, which is the social utility discount rate under certain assumptions. Hotelling's rule continues to operate unchanged in the presence of a royalty tax, and no change occurs to the optimal depletion path. This is also true for a royalty subsidy scheme. If we denote the royalty subsidy rate by beta, the efficiency condition may be given as 1 plus beta into Pt equals 1 plus beta into P not into e raised to power 1 into t, which implies Pt equals P not into e raised to power 1 into t. Thus, we may conclude that a royalty tax or subsidy is neutral in its effect on the optimal extraction path. However, such a tax may discourage or a subsidy encourage the exploration effort for new mineral deposits. Theories of optimal use of non-renewable resources. Let us start with a question. Does a market economy yield an optimal and efficient allocation of resources? The answer to this is yes, both efficient and optimal under certain circumstances. Efficiency of the market mechanism. In a competitive market economy, profit maximization requires that the firms take proper account of their revenue and cost functions. The utility function provides appropriate information about the market demand curve and so provides appropriate information about the firm's revenues. Any costs of production and extraction will be taken into account by business. A market economy will probably not deliver an efficient and optimal allocation of non-renewable resources because monopoly, depletion too slow, or social costs of resource depletion not considered, for example, pollution externalities, private market interest rate above the social discount rate. There may be other forms of market failure, like absence of well-defined and enforceable property rights and incomplete information. Some of the agent's functions may depend upon environmental quality, like utility and output produced in the economy depends on environmental quality. The relationship between the price and the resource stock is depicted in the figure. It is important to note that the rate at which the exhaustible resource is extracted depends upon its price. Given is the initial resource stock and the information that the resource stock must converge to zero when the economy approaches the end of the planning horizon. Too low initial prices would lead to too large amounts of resource use in each period, and all the resource stock would get depleted before the end of the planning horizon. Conversely, if the initial price is too high, then each period may record too small amount of resource use and some stock may remain wastefully undepleted by the end of the planning horizon. Hence, this suggests that there is one optimal initial price that brings about the rate of extraction consistent with the resource stock being fully depleted at the end of the planning period.
Let us now summarize what we learned in this module. Non-renewable resources are those mineral deposits whose crude forms are produced over very long periods of time by biological, chemical and physical processes. Once extracted, these resources cannot be regenerated in the timescales which are relevant to human beings. Another thing that we learned in this module was optimal allocation of non-renewable resources involves maximizing the social welfare function. And the efficient price path for a non-renewable resource must follow the Hotterling rules. The third equation in the dynamic efficiency conditions that we studied involves the explanation of the Hotterling rule.